You know, sometimes people say Buddhism is a religion of atheism, and maybe at first glance it kind of sounds true. After all, the Buddha didn't talk about a creator God, and there's no divine being sitting up there watching over everything. But if you pause for a moment and really listen beneath those words, you might feel there's something deeper, something quieter, something more human. And before we go further, if this kind of reflection speaks to you, you might want to subscribe, because here we explore ideas that touch the heart more than the intellect. When Western scholars first met Buddhism, they came from a world built on the idea of a creator, someone who made everything, someone to worship. So when they looked at the Buddha's teachings and found no mention of that kind of God, they thought, so this must be atheism. It was a quick conclusion, but not quite right. The Buddha didn't deny the existence of a God. He simply chose silence. Not out of arrogance or indifference, but out of compassion. He saw how endless debate over what can't be proven only pulls people away from what truly matters, understanding suffering, and finding peace right here, right now. It's a bit like this. Imagine your house is on fire. Would you stand there arguing about who started the fire, or would you run to put out? The Buddha wanted us to focus on putting out the fire of our own pain, our confusion, our restlessness. He knew that arguing about invisible things doesn't make us free. Awareness does. There's a story I love, a parable from Zen. It says that trying to understand ultimate truth only through thought is like a wild fox trying to catch the wind. You can chase it your whole life and still never hold it in your hands. Because truth, in the way the Buddha saw it, isn't something you catch. It's something you see when you finally stop running. It's something you feel in stillness, in your breath, in the space between your thoughts. Now, some people hear that and think, oh, so Buddhism is anti-God. But maybe that's missing the point. The Buddha wasn't trying to erase faith. He was trying to free us from being trapped by it. He didn't want us to live by belief or disbelief. He wanted us to live by understanding. And that's something both the believer and the non-believer can share. Because whether you call it faith, awareness, or love, we all long for peace. There's a quiet beauty in that. The Buddha never said, believe me. He said, come and see. That's a very different invitation. It means your own experience matters more than anyone's words, even his. It means you are allowed to question, to explore, to find out for yourself what's true. And maybe that's what makes Buddhism feel so different. It doesn't give you a fixed story about creation. It gives you tools to understand your own mind. It tells you that peace doesn't come from above. It grows from within. I once met a man who told me he stopped believing in God years ago, and because of that, he thought he could never be spiritual again. But the more we talked, the more I realized he still prayed, just in a different way. He prayed when he sat silently by his mother's grave. He prayed when he looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be here." And I told him, maybe that's what the Buddha meant. Maybe spirituality isn't about believing in someone out there. Maybe it's about awakening to what's already here. He smiled, and for a moment there was peace in his eyes. You see, the Buddha wasn't interested in building another belief system. He wasn't asking us to pick sides, believer or atheist. He was pointing beyond both, to something that can only be felt, not argued. It's like his famous metaphor. His teachings are just a finger pointing at the moon. The finger isn't the moon. It's just there to help you look up. So maybe the next time someone says, Buddhism is atheistic, you can smile and say, maybe it's not about belief at all. Maybe it's about waking up. Because when you really wake up, everything, your laughter, your pain, your breath, becomes sacred. And that's the quiet secret the Buddha left behind. You don't need to worship anyone. You don't need to deny anyone. You just need to be fully alive, to see, to feel, to understand. If that idea makes you pause, if it brings you a little peace, or maybe even a small smile, then stay here with me. Subscribe if you'd like, and let's keep walking this path together, one breath, one story, one gentle truth at a time. You know, the more I think about it, the more I realize that Buddhism was never about rejecting the idea of God. It was about freeing us from needing to define everything. The Buddha didn't tell us what to believe. He showed us how to see. He spoke about life as it truly is, a world that's always changing, deeply connected, and full of mystery. And maybe that's where the beauty lies. Because when you stop trying to label everything, you start to feel that quiet connection between all things, the same connection that's been there all along. The Buddhist way of seeing the universe isn't about a single creator sitting somewhere far away. It's about a living, breathing cosmos, full of countless beings, realms, and states of mind. The Buddha spoke of devas and brahmas, not as gods who ruled over us, but as beings in different stages of consciousness, just like us, just in other forms. Some are joyful, some are lost, some are wise, and some still search. It's less about hierarchy and more about relationship, about the great web that connects all life. There's a story I've always loved about Brahma Sahampati. After the Buddha awakened, he thought maybe his realization was too deep, too subtle for anyone to understand. He hesitated to teach. But Brahma Sahampati, a being from a higher realm, appeared and pleaded with him, "Please, share your wisdom. There are those in the world with only a little dust in their eyes. They will understand." And because of that moment, the Buddha decided to teach. It's a story that reminds me how wisdom often needs an invitation, how even the awakened need encouragement to share what they know. When I first heard that story, I thought of how many of us keep quiet about what we've learned in life, thinking maybe no one will understand. But someone always does. There's always a soul out there with just a little dust in their eyes, waiting for a bit of light. That's the heart of compassion, the reason the Buddha taught, and maybe the reason we share stories today. Now, I know this whole talk about realms and beings can sound mythical, even strange. But maybe the point isn't whether these realms literally exist. It's what they represent. Maybe heaven and hell are not places far away, but states of mind we move through every day. Think about it. You felt heaven before, when your heart was full of love or gratitude or peace. And you felt hell too, when you were trapped in anger, regret, or loneliness. These are the realms we travel through all the time. The Buddha was teaching us how to find balance right in the middle of all that. And he never asked anyone to take his word for it. He always said, "See for yourself." That's what makes Buddhism feel so personal. It's not about faith. It's about discovery. In one of his teachings, he told the Kalamas, "Don't believe something just because someone wise said it or because it's written in Scripture. Test it, live it, see if it brings peace." That's such a beautiful, down-to-earth message. It gives you permission to be curious, to question, to think for yourself. I think that's why Buddhism and science often feel like cousins. Both start with observation. Both ask us to see what's real, not just believe what's told. The Buddha explored the inner world the same way scientists explore the outer world. He asked people to study their minds, their reactions, their desires, their fears. And what he found was simple but profound. When we stop fighting what is, we find peace. When we stop clinging to our ideas, we start to see clearly. I remember a time in my own life when I couldn't stop overthinking everything. I wanted answers about what happens after death, why people suffer, why life feels unfair. I looked everywhere, books, videos, debates, but all I found were opinions. Then one night I sat quietly. I just breathed. I watched my thoughts come and go like clouds. And for a few seconds, everything felt still. It wasn't that I found an answer. It was that I no longer needed one. Maybe that's what awakening feels like. Not knowing more, but needing less. The Buddha once said his teaching is like a raft. You use it to cross the river, but you don't carry it on your back after you've reached the other side. That's how gentle his wisdom is. It doesn't want to bind you. It wants to free you. And if you think about it, this whole misunderstanding, calling Buddhism atheism, comes from our human need to label. But the truth is, Buddhism isn't about rejecting God. It's about not getting stuck on any label at all. It's about learning to live awake, to be kind, aware, and free in this very moment. So maybe instead of asking, does Buddhism believe in God? We could ask something simpler. What helps me live with peace and love right now? Because that's the question the Buddha really cared about. And if you've been listening this far, maybe you've already started to feel that little quiet shift inside, that breath that suddenly feels softer. Maybe that's what awakening begins as, a small, steady peace growing inside you. If this brings you even a moment of calm, I hope you'll stay for the next part of our journey. Subscribe if you like, not because you have to, but because maybe this space gives your heart a place to rest. Together, we can keep exploring these quiet truths, not as followers or believers, but as friends walking the same gentle path toward understanding. You know, sometimes I think what the Buddha really wanted wasn't for us to worship him, but to understand what he understood. He didn't talk about heaven or gods or some perfect place we go when we die. He talked about the here and now, about suffering and how it begins and how it can end. That's the heart of his message. And maybe that's why so many people misunderstand Buddhism, because it doesn't fit neatly into the idea of religion the way we're used to. It's not about praying for salvation. It's about waking up to life as it is. The Buddha never said there's no God. He simply said that whether or not a creator exists, it doesn't change the fact that we suffer, and it doesn't change how peace is found. He wanted us to look at what we can actually touch, our own minds, our own choices, our own hearts. He taught that the roots of our pain are craving, aversion, and ignorance, the constant push and pull inside us, the wanting, the rejecting, the not understanding. And he showed a path to let go of all that, not through belief, but through awareness. There's something so deeply human about that. It's not grand or distant. It's quiet and real, like learning how to breathe again after a storm. Maybe that's what makes Buddhism so universal. You don't need to be Buddhist to understand it. You just need to be alive. Think about it. Every one of us has known loss. Every one of us has been afraid or angry or heartbroken. The Buddha didn't say, run away from that. He said, look at it, gently, with understanding. Because the moment we turn toward our pain instead of away from it, it begins to soften. And in that softening, we find something beautiful, compassion. I think that's one of the most powerful truths in Buddhism. Compassion doesn't come from trying to fix the world. It comes from understanding it, from realizing that everyone is carrying something. The stranger who cuts you off in traffic, the friend who stops calling, the parent who didn't know how to love you right. All of them are struggling with their own suffering, their own confusion. And when you see that, not just in your mind but in your heart, forgiveness starts to happen naturally. You stop needing to win. You stop needing to be right. You just start wanting to be kind. There's a gentle saying in Buddhism, hatred never ceases by hatred. Hatred only ceases by love. It sounds simple, maybe even naive, but it's the kind of truth that only becomes real when you live it. You don't fight darkness with more darkness. You light a candle. Sometimes people ask, so if Buddhism isn't about worship, what do Buddhists actually do? And I smile because the answer is so beautifully simple. They practice awareness. They breathe. They watch their minds. They try to live kindly, speak truthfully, and act gently. It's not about following rules. It's about living in a way that brings peace to yourself and others. Meditation, for example, isn't some mystical act. It's just sitting quietly and noticing what's going on inside. It's realizing that your thoughts are like clouds. They come and go, but you are the sky, always open, always still. When I first started sitting quietly, I thought I was doing it wrong because my mind wouldn't stop racing. But then I realized that's the point. It's not about stopping your thoughts. It's about seeing them clearly and choosing not to be carried away. Maybe that's what awakening really means, not floating away from life, but finally being here for it, fully awake to every sound, every breath, every small beauty that passes by unnoticed when we rush too much. And the more I reflect on the Buddha's path, the more I feel that his silence on God wasn't a denial. It was a kind of respect, a respect for mystery. He didn't want to trap people in ideas. He wanted them to see what can't be put into words. Maybe he understood that the divine, whatever you want to call it, can't be defined. It can only be lived, felt, experienced through kindness, compassion, and awareness. So when someone asks me, do Buddhists believe in God? I like to answer, Buddhists believe in goodness, in the power of love, mindfulness, and understanding, because those are the things that actually change lives. Those are the things that turn fear into courage and pain into wisdom. And maybe that's what the Buddha meant when he said, you are your own light. Not that we should walk alone, but that each of us carries a spark that can guide the way, if we take the time to see it. If this message touches something in you, if it brings even a small sense of peace or recognition, I hope you'll stay for what's next. There's still so much beauty to uncover in this journey. Subscribe if you'd like, not as a follower, but as a fellow traveler, as someone who's walking the same quiet road toward understanding. Maybe, just maybe, we can learn together how to live a little lighter, love a little deeper, and find a little more peace right where we are. Sometimes the simplest truths are the hardest to see. We spend so much of our lives chasing something: success, approval, comfort, love, and somewhere along the way, we forget to stop and just be. The Buddha once said, when you realize how perfect everything is, you will tilt your head back and laugh at the sky. And maybe he didn't mean that everything in life is easy or pleasant. Maybe he meant that everything, even the pain, even the confusion, belongs to the great unfolding of our awakening. Buddhism teaches something called dependent arising, the idea that everything exists because of something else. Nothing stands alone. Every joy you've ever felt came from a chain of moments before it, and every sorrow too. The morning sun, the tree that gives you shade, even your breath, they all depend on countless causes and conditions. It's like a web, infinite and delicate, connecting all things. And when you start to see life that way, something softens in you. You stop asking why me and start whispering, we're all in this together. The Buddha's message wasn't to escape the world, but to understand it. He wasn't teaching people to run away from life storms. He was teaching them how to stand in the rain without drowning. And that's something we all need, isn't it? Because storms come, people leave, bodies age. The things we once held so tightly slip through our fingers. But when we see that everything rises and falls naturally, when we stop fighting what's already changing, peace begins to appear, not as a reward, but as a quiet truth that was always there. I remember once hearing a story about a monk and a student. The student asked, "Master, what is enlightenment?" The monk looked up from sweeping the floor and said, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." The student frowned, "But that's too simple." The monk smiled gently. "Yes, it is simple. That's why it's so hard." And that story always makes me smile, because it reminds me that awakening isn't about doing something extraordinary. It's about coming back to the ordinary with clear eyes and an open heart. Maybe enlightenment isn't some distant mountain peak. It's being fully present for this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. Maybe it's realizing that peace doesn't wait for a perfect life. It blooms right in the middle of imperfection. It's the gentle smile after a long cry, the deep breath after an argument, the quiet strength of starting over. In Buddhism, there's also the teaching of no self. And at first, that idea can sound strange, like it's telling you that you don't exist. But that's not really it. What the Buddha was pointing to is the illusion we hold about being separate. We think there's a solid me inside this body, someone fixed and unchanging. But when you look closer at your thoughts, your emotions, your memories, you start to see they're always moving, always shifting. Who you were yesterday isn't exactly who you are today. So maybe the self isn't a thing at all. It's a process, like a river, flowing alive, always changing. And when we stop clinging to this idea of me, we become lighter. We start to care more deeply, love more freely, forgive more easily. Because if there's no hard line between you and me, then your happiness becomes my happiness. And your suffering becomes mine too. That's where compassion truly begins. Not from duty, not from morality, but from understanding that we're not separate, that your joy is my joy, that the stranger's tears could have been mine. When you see that, kindness stops being a choice, it becomes your nature. And maybe that's why the Buddha smiled so often, not because life was easy, but because he understood it deeply. He saw that even pain has its place, that the seed of awakening lives in every sorrow we've ever carried. The tears, the losses, the mistakes, they all soften the heart until it's ready to open. You don't have to call yourself Buddhist to walk this path. You don't have to meditate perfectly or know all the teachings. All you really need is a willingness to be still, to listen, to touch life gently. The rest unfolds on its own. Sometimes I like to think that the Buddha's greatest teaching wasn't in his words, but in his silence. That calm presence, that deep awareness. It spoke louder than any sermon ever could. It said, "You already have what you're looking for." So tonight, or maybe tomorrow morning, take a moment, sit quietly, feel your breath move in and out. Let your thoughts drift by without chasing them. And if even for a few seconds you feel that small, still peace inside you, know that this is it. This is the heart of the Buddha's message. And if you find comfort here, in these quiet reflections, I hope you'll stay with me as we keep exploring together. Subscribe if you like, not because it's expected, but because maybe, just maybe, these words help your heart breathe a little easier. We'll keep walking this gentle path together, one mindful step at a time. There's a moment, somewhere along this journey, when you realize the Buddha was never trying to give you answers. He was trying to give you peace. The kind that doesn't come from knowing everything, but from finally being okay with not knowing. Maybe that's the quiet miracle of his teaching, that you stop chasing the perfect explanation and start feeling at home in the mystery of life. I think about how much of our suffering comes from resistance. We want things to stay the same, but they don't. We want people to act a certain way, but they won't. We want to control the tide, but life keeps moving anyway. Buddhism doesn't tell us to stop wanting. It helps us see what happens when we hold too tightly. It reminds us that everything we love is passing through our hands like water. And instead of trying to grab it, maybe we can just feel its coolness for a moment and let it go with gratitude. There's something beautiful about that kind of letting go. It doesn't mean indifference. It means love without fear. You care deeply, but you no longer cling. You can love someone knowing they may change, knowing you may change, and somehow that makes the love even more real, because it's not based on possession, it's based on presence. The Buddha once compared attachment to holding a burning coal and wondering why you're in pain. We all do that sometimes, don't we? We hold on to grudges, to guilt, to people who've already walked away. We hold on because it feels safer than the empty space they leave behind. But when we finally open our hand, when we let that coal drop, the pain eases. That's what freedom feels like. Not a grand revelation, just a deep exhale after years of holding your breath. I remember someone once asking a monk, "What did you gain from meditation?" He smiled and said, "Nothing, but I lost a lot: anger, anxiety, fear." That's the kind of wisdom the Buddha offered. It's not about gaining anything new. It's about releasing everything that weighs you down. And maybe that's the real meaning of awakening. Not a lightning bolt or a miracle, but the slow, gentle undoing of all the ways we've misunderstood ourselves. It's realizing that you were never broken, only tangled. And as you breathe, sit and let the noise settle. The knots start to loosen. The light was always there. You just stopped long enough to see it. The Buddha's own story reminds us of that. He wasn't a god. He wasn't born divine. He was a man who faced suffering deeply enough to understand it. He lost, he searched, he tried extremes, luxury, starvation, everything in between. And when none of it brought peace, he sat beneath a tree, quiet, awake, and he saw that the middle way, the balance between indulgence and denial, was the path home. That's something I think about often, especially in our modern world, where everything feels so loud. We swing between wanting too much and giving up completely. But maybe peace isn't found in either extreme. It's found in that gentle space in the middle, where you're not running from life, but not clinging to it either. You're just here, breathing, aware, alive, and in that stillness, something changes. You start noticing small things again. The warmth of sunlight on your hands, the rhythm of your breath, the sound of leaves in the wind. Life stops being something you think about and becomes something you feel. That's the shift. That's the awakening. Sometimes I think we all have a Buddha inside us, the quiet witness who never judges, who simply watches life unfold with compassion. The more we listen to that part of ourselves, the kinder the world becomes. You start treating others gently, not because you're told to, but because you feel their pain as your own. You begin to forgive, not out of duty, but because you've learned that holding resentment only hurts you. And slowly, you begin to see what the Buddha meant when he said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." We spend our lives chasing peace in people, in possessions, in success, but it's always been right here waiting beneath all the noise. Maybe that's why the Buddha smiled, not because he escaped life, but because he finally understood it. And when you understand, you stop fighting so much. You stop rushing. You begin to walk lighter. So tonight, if you're listening to this and feeling tired or uncertain or just a little lost, take a moment to breathe. Place your hand on your heart. And remember, you don't have to figure it all out. You just have to be here. Maybe peace isn't something you chase. It's something that finds you when you finally stop running. If these words bring even a small comfort, if they help you breathe a little easier, I'd love for you to stay with me on this path. Subscribe if it feels right, not for me, but for you, because this space is a reminder that you're not walking alone. We're learning, unlearning, and waking up together, one gentle breath at a time. There's a moment, somewhere along this path, when you realize that the Buddha's teaching isn't about becoming something new. It's about remembering who you've always been. Beneath all the noise, the roles, the fears, there's this quiet, kind awareness that's been here the whole time. Maybe that's what he found under the Bodhi tree. Not some distant truth, but the one that was waiting inside him all along. You see, the Buddha never said life would be easy after awakening. He never promised that pain would disappear or that the world would suddenly be fair. What he taught was how to hold it all with grace, how to stand inside the storm and still keep your heart open. Because awakening isn't about escaping life. It's about embracing it fully, with eyes wide open and a heart that refuses to close. Sometimes people misunderstand Buddhism and think it's about being detached or cold. But real detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging. It's the difference between holding a flower gently in your hand and crushing it while trying to make it last forever. You can love deeply, even more deeply, when you know nothing can be held forever. Because that love becomes pure, it's no longer about possession. It's about presence. There's something very tender about this truth. It's the kind of wisdom that doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't demand faith. It invites reflection. Maybe that's why, even after all these centuries, the Buddha's words still touch hearts. They speak to that quiet place inside us that longs for stillness, for understanding, for peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. I once heard a story about a monk who was asked what enlightenment felt like. He smiled and said, "Before enlightenment, I chopped wood and carried water. After enlightenment, I chopped wood and carried water." And that's it, really. Nothing magical, nothing glamorous. Just life, exactly as it is. But live with awareness. Live with peace. You still wake up, still feel joy and sorrow, still lose and begin again. But something changes inside. You stop fighting what's happening, and you start flowing with it. You laugh more easily. You forgive more freely. And even when sadness comes, you don't see it as an enemy. You see it as part of the great rhythm of life. That's what I love most about Buddhism. It's so human. It doesn't ask you to be perfect. It just asks you to be honest, to look deeply at what's real, even when it's uncomfortable, to meet yourself where you are, with kindness instead of judgment. Because the moment you stop pretending to be someone else, the healing begins. The Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths not to make us feel small, but to show us the way out of suffering. He started with honesty. There is suffering, because denying it only makes it worse. But then he gave hope. Suffering has a cause, and it can end. And the path to that end isn't found in worship or dogma. It's found in the simple things we do each day, in right thought, right action, right understanding, right speech, right mindfulness. When you live that way, life starts to feel lighter. You begin to see that happiness isn't something you achieve. It's something that arises when you stop standing in your own way. You realize that peace isn't hiding at the top of a mountain. It's right here, in the middle of your ordinary life, waiting to be noticed. I think that's why the Buddha smiled even as he grew old and frail. He saw that everything changes, yet nothing is ever truly lost. He once said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." It sounds simple, but it's one of the most profound truths there is. Everything passes. Joy, pain, love, youth, even this very breath. But if you live with awareness, every passing moment becomes sacred. And maybe that's the secret, not to run from impermanence, but to fall in love with it. Because when you know that everything changes, you start to cherish each moment more deeply. You start saying, I love you more often, forgiving faster, holding hands a little longer, watching the sunset a little slower. You start to live not as if life will last forever, but as if every breath is a gift. So, if you're listening right now, maybe take this as your reminder. You don't have to rush anywhere. You're already walking the path, even if it doesn't feel like it. Every small act of kindness, every deep breath, every moment you choose peace instead of anger, that's the path of awakening. And maybe you won't notice it happening. Maybe one morning, you'll just wake up, look around, and realize that something inside you feels softer. That life still hurts sometimes, but it doesn't scare you the same way it used to. That somehow you've grown gentle. If this message feels like a quiet mirror of your own heart, stay close. Subscribe if you wish, not for me, but for that part of you that needs reminders like this. Together, we'll keep walking, keep breathing, and keep discovering the peace that's been here all along, waiting patiently beneath the noise, whispering, you are already home. Sometimes, when I sit quietly at night, with just the sound of the wind moving through the trees, I think about how the Buddha must have felt sitting under that Bodhi tree all those years ago. Not as a god, not as someone who had all the answers, but as a man who simply refused to run anymore. He stopped running from fear, from pain, from the questions that have no clear answers. Maybe that's where awakening really begins, not in finding something new, but in finally stopping the chase. We spend so much of our lives chasing things, don't we? Chasing success, love, peace, approval. Always something just a little out of reach. We keep thinking, when I get there, then I'll finally be happy. But the truth, the quiet and sometimes uncomfortable truth, is that there is no there. There's only here, right now, this breath, this moment. And that's exactly where the Buddha pointed us back to again and again. It's funny how the simplest truths are often the hardest to live. The Buddha never asked us to worship him. He asked us to wake up. He never said, follow me blindly. He said, come and see for yourself. There's such humility in that, such respect for your own inner wisdom. He trusted that every person, no matter who they are, carries the same light within. The path isn't about becoming something holy. It's about remembering that the light was always there, under all the dust of life. You see, the mind loves to complicate things. It wants to analyze, to debate, to label, but the heart, it just wants to understand. That's why, in so many of the Buddha's teachings, you find this quiet balance. He didn't give rigid rules. He gave gentle direction, like a friend walking beside you, reminding you to slow down, to breathe, to notice the way sunlight falls through the trees. I remember once reading a story about a young monk who asked an old teacher, what is the essence of Buddhism? The teacher didn't answer with a long sermon. He just looked at the young monk, smiled, and said, when hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. At first, it sounds too simple, almost like a joke. But the more you sit with it, the more it reveals itself. It's not about eating or sleeping. It's about presence. It's about being where you are, doing what you're doing fully. That's what mindfulness really is. It's not some fancy practice reserved for the spiritual. It's a way of living. It's the way you pour your morning coffee, noticing the warmth in your hands. It's the way you listen to someone without thinking of what to say next. It's the way you take a walk and actually see the world around you instead of living in your head. The Buddha taught that when you live like this, life opens up. The small things become sacred. Even washing dishes can become a meditation if your mind is there with your hands. Even silence can feel full when you're no longer afraid of it. You start to see beauty in the ordinary and peace in the moments you used to overlook. And slowly, you begin to realize that peace was never something you had to find. It was something you had to stop covering up. Every worry, every regret, every what if was like a cloud passing in front of the sun. The sun never disappeared. It was just waiting for the clouds to pass. I think that's what real awakening feels like. Not fireworks, not some grand revelation, but a gentle clearing. The noise quiets down, and for the first time, you can hear your own heart clearly. You realize that beneath the chaos, life has always been whispering, "You're okay. You've always been okay." And that's when compassion begins to grow. Because once you've touched that quiet place inside yourself, you start to see it in everyone else. You see that everyone is struggling in their own way, carrying invisible stories and unspoken pain. You stop needing to be right all the time and start wanting to be kind. The Buddha once said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love." Maybe that's what the world needs more than anything right now. Not more arguments, not more labels, but simple love. The kind that listens, the kind that forgives, the kind that sees beyond the surface. Because when you really see people, not their roles, not their mistakes, but their humanity, something shifts. The walls fall away. You start living differently. You speak softer. You pause before reacting. You begin to ask, what would bring peace to this moment? Instead of, how can I win? And in that small change, entire worlds begin to heal. Maybe that's why the Buddha never answered the question about God. Because the answer wasn't something to be said, it was something to be lived. Every act of kindness, every moment of awareness, every quiet breath of gratitude is the answer. So if you're listening right now, I want to remind you, you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to know what enlightenment means or whether you believe in this or that. Just start where you are. Sit with yourself for a while. Feel your own heartbeat. That's where all wisdom begins, with stillness, with presence, with honesty. And if this message speaks to something in you, if it feels like truth whispered softly instead of preached loudly, then stay. Let's walk this journey together. Subscribe, not just to the channel, but to this quiet promise you make to yourself, to live more gently, to love more fully, and to see life not as a problem to solve, but as a mystery to be lived. Because maybe, just maybe, that's what the Buddha was trying to tell us all along. You know, sometimes I wonder what the Buddha would say if he were walking among us today, not as a figure in ancient robes, but just as a person, someone sitting quietly in a cafe, watching people rush by, phones in hand, eyes full of exhaustion. I think he wouldn't lecture us. He'd probably just smile. Maybe he'd say something simple like, "You're carrying too much." And in that one sentence, everything would soften. Because that's what most of us are doing, aren't we? Carrying too much. The past we can't change. The future we can't predict. The weight of trying to be enough, to have enough, to do enough. But life isn't meant to be carried like that. It's meant to be lived, moment by moment, breath by breath. That's what the Buddha saw so clearly. That peace doesn't come from controlling life. It comes from letting it be. There's a story I love about a monk who once stood by a river, holding a small cup of salt. He poured it into the water and said to the students, "Taste the river." They did, and said it tasted fresh. Then he added, "Now imagine putting that same handful of salt into a glass of water. How would it taste then?" The students replied, "It would taste bitter." The monk smiled and said, "That's the difference between a narrow heart and a wide one. When your heart is small, even a little pain makes your world bitter. But when your heart becomes wide like a river, the pain dissolves. It's still there, but it doesn't define you anymore. That's the kind of wisdom the Buddha left us with. Not complicated theories, but lessons about the heart. He didn't tell us to get rid of pain. He showed us how to hold it so gently that it loses its power to hurt us. He taught that the mind can be trained, the heart can expand, and even suffering can become a teacher. Maybe you've noticed this too, that the hardest moments in life often carry the deepest lessons. Loss teaches love. Failure teaches humility. Silence teaches understanding. The Buddha called this the path of insight, the way of seeing things as they truly are, without fighting them, without turning away. It's not an easy path, but it's the one that sets us free. I remember once meeting an old man at a temple in California. He wasn't a monk, just someone who came there every morning to sit quietly under a tree. When I asked him why he came, he smiled and said, "Because here I remember who I am." That sentence never left me, because that's what practice really is, not escaping the world, but remembering yourself in the middle of it. Maybe that's what the Buddha meant by awakening. It's not about transcending life, but about waking up to life. Waking up to the way the morning light feels on your face. Waking up to the sound of laughter or the taste of a simple meal. Waking up to the people you love, the ones who have been there all along while you were too distracted to notice. Waking up to the truth that every breath is a miracle you didn't earn, but still get to receive. We live in a world that moves fast, too fast. Everyone's trying to get somewhere. But what if the point isn't to get anywhere? What if the point is to finally stop, to look around, and realize you're already where you're meant to be? That's something the Buddha hinted at when he said, "There's no path to happiness. Happiness is the path." It's not about reaching a destination. It's about walking with awareness, step by step, through this life that's already enough. You don't need to have all the answers. The Buddha didn't give answers. He gave questions, gentle ones like, what are you holding on to? Or what is causing your suffering? He invited people to look, to listen, to turn inward, because the real teacher isn't out there somewhere. It's inside you, the still, quiet space that knows what's true long before your mind catches up. If you ever had a moment when you felt completely at peace for no reason, maybe watching a sunset or sitting with someone you love, or just breathing slowly, that's it. That's the glimpse. That's the heart of what he taught. It's not far away. It's not mystical. It's right here, hidden behind all the noise. And once you taste it, you start to want less. Not because you're giving up on life, but because you realize how little you need to be happy. You stop chasing and start living. You start choosing stillness over speed, gratitude over grasping, presence over perfection. You start living in the middle of the mess with a calm heart. That's what it means to be awake. Not to rise above life, but to fall completely into it with eyes open, heart open, arms open. So, as you listen now, maybe take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Feel your own aliveness, the warmth in your hands, the rhythm of your breath. This moment is your teacher. This moment is your path. And if you'd like to keep walking this path together, gently, slowly, with honesty and warmth, subscribe. Not because you have to, but because sometimes it helps to have a quiet corner in this noisy world, a place to come back to when you forget who you are. Because in the end, Buddhism isn't about believing in something. It's about remembering that you are already enough, that peace isn't somewhere else, and that everything you've been searching for has been quietly waiting inside you all along. You know, There's something deeply comforting about realizing that the Buddha never asked anyone to believe in him. He wasn't trying to start a religion or create followers. He was simply showing a way to suffer less, to live more freely, to understand life as it is. He spoke to farmers, to kings, to beggars, to mothers, people just like you and me. And he said, "Come and see for yourself. Not believe, but see." That's what makes his message timeless. It's not about worship. It's about awakening. And maybe that's why Buddhism feels so different from other faiths. It doesn't ask you to surrender to a god. It invites you to understand your own mind. It's like the Buddha handed us a mirror and said, "Look closely. Everything you seek is right here." And when you really do that, when you stop running, stop blaming, stop waiting for life to fix itself, you begin to see that peace isn't something you get. It's something you uncover. Sometimes people think Buddhism is all about silence and sitting still, like monks meditating in caves for years. But that's just one small piece of it. The real practice happens in everyday life, while washing dishes, talking to your children, or walking under a cloudy sky. Every moment can be a chance to wake up. Every moment can be a teacher. Even frustration, even sadness, even waiting in traffic. They can all be doors that open understanding, if you're willing to see them that way. The Buddha once said that life is like a storm, and peace isn't about escaping the storm. It's about learning to walk calmly through the rain. That's what we forget sometimes. We think peace will come when the storm ends, when everything is finally perfect. But it doesn't work that way. Peace isn't the absence of trouble. It's the quiet strength that lets you breathe right through it. I remember hearing a story about a monk who was asked, "What's the greatest miracle?" And he said, "I eat when I'm hungry, I sleep when I'm tired." Such simple words, yet so profound, because that's the miracle, to live so fully in the present moment that you don't resist life. You just live it. You let things be as they are. You stop fighting the flow. And when that happens, something beautiful unfolds. The walls you built inside begin to soften. The fear that used to control you starts to fade. You begin to feel connected to the earth beneath your feet, to the people around you, to the rhythm of the world itself. That's the heart of Buddhist teaching. Not to become something new, but to remember that you've never been separate. You're part of this whole, breathing, living universe. Maybe that's why so many people find peace in nature. When you stand under the stars or listen to the ocean or walk through an old forest, there's a stillness that fills you without asking for anything in return. You don't need to prove yourself to the trees. You don't need to impress the wind. You just exist, and somehow that's enough. That's Buddhism, too. A quiet reminder that being alive is already sacred. Of course, life isn't always gentle. There will be days when your heart aches, when you lose someone you love, when the weight feels unbearable. But even in those moments, there's a thread of compassion that runs through everything. The Buddha didn't deny suffering. He faced it directly. He said, "This is suffering." And then softly he said, "But it can be understood." That's the promise he offered. Not that life will be easy, but that pain can become wisdom if you hold it with care. And that's something you can do right now. You don't have to be perfect. You don't need to know all the teachings. Just start by being kind to yourself, to others, to this moment. When you fail, it's okay. When you forget, it's okay. The Buddha never said you had to be flawless. He just asked that you try again and again to wake up, to see clearly, to love gently, to live fully. There's something so human in that, so forgiving, so real, because Buddhism isn't about escaping the mess of life. It's about finding peace within it. It's about sitting with your sadness and saying, This too is part of me. It's about forgiving your past because it shaped your heart. It's about realizing that even in your confusion, there's a light that never goes out. So, if you're listening to this, maybe just take a moment to breathe. Feel the rise and fall of your chest. Feel the ground supporting you. Maybe whisper to yourself, I'm here. I'm okay. That's all the Buddha ever wanted us to understand, that peace begins right where you are, not in some faraway temple or afterlife, but in this breath, this heartbeat, this very second. And if something in these words touches you, if you feel a little more at ease, a little more connected, stay with that. Let it grow. And maybe subscribe, not for the sake of numbers, but as a quiet way of saying, yes, I want to keep walking this path. I want to keep remembering. Because this journey isn't about finding something new. It's about coming home. Home to your breath, your heart, your life. And maybe, just maybe, realizing that you've never truly left. You know, after walking through everything we've shared, the stories, the stillness, the reflections, there's something I keep coming back to. It's the simple truth that the Buddha never promised us a life without pain. What he offered was a way to understand it, a way to walk through it without losing our peace. He never said, follow me and your problems will disappear. Instead, he said, look deeply into your heart and you'll see that your pain, your joy, your fears, all of it is part of the same beautiful story of being human. And that's what makes this teaching so real. It doesn't ask you to escape life. It invites you to embrace it fully. Every laugh, every tear, every quiet morning when you wake up and don't quite know who you're supposed to be. Buddhism isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. It's about showing up for your life exactly as it is and saying, this is enough. I think that's what so many of us forget. We spend years chasing peace, love, purpose, as if there's somewhere else waiting for us to catch up. But maybe, just maybe, they've been right here all along, waiting for us to slow down enough to notice. The Buddha called that awakening, but it doesn't have to sound mystical. It can be as simple as watching the sun set and realizing, I don't need anything more in this moment. You don't have to meditate perfectly or understand all the sutras. You don't even have to call yourself a Buddhist. You just have to be willing to look, to pause for a breath and see things as they are, because that's where real freedom begins. It's not out there in some future moment where everything is fixed. It's here, in the middle of the mess, in the middle of you being human. I've always loved how the Buddha spoke about the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. Not clinging, not rejecting. Just balanced. Just enough. It's a way of living that says, don't run toward pleasure. Don't run from pain. Be present with both. Let life touch you, but don't let it drown you. Let joy move through you, but don't try to hold it still. Everything comes, everything goes, and that's okay. And in that gentle acceptance, something inside you softens. You stop needing to fix everything. You stop trying to prove your worth. You start listening to your heart, to others, to the quiet hum of life around you. And that's when you start to see that compassion isn't something you have to create. It's something that's been there all along, waiting to be remembered. There's a peace that comes when you realize that nothing has to be different for you to feel whole. That's what the Buddha meant when he said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. It's such a simple line, but it holds the weight of the world. Because the truth is, the moment you stop searching for peace, you start living it. And maybe that's what this whole journey has been about, not learning something new, but remembering something ancient and tender, remembering that you are already enough, that you are already loved, even on your quietest days, that this breath, this moment, this imperfect, fleeting life, is sacred just as it is. When you start to live that way, gratitude begins to bloom in the smallest corners of your day. A smile from a stranger, the way the morning light hits your window, the taste of your favorite tea. Little things that whisper, "You're alive, you're here." Isn't that enough? And maybe, for the first time, you find yourself answering softly, "Yes, it is." I think that's the real miracle of the Buddha's path. It turns ordinary life into something extraordinary. It shows us that enlightenment isn't some distant state of perfection. It's right here, in how you hold your coffee cup, how you listen when someone speaks, how you breathe when you're tired. It's in how you choose kindness, even when the world feels harsh. So as we come to the end of this journey together, I just want to thank you. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for walking through these moments with an open heart. Maybe these words reminded you of something you've forgotten. Maybe they gave you just enough peace to face the day with a softer gaze. And if you'd like to keep exploring this path, slowly, gently, without pressure, then I'd love to walk beside you. You can subscribe, not as a commitment, but as a quiet invitation, a way to say, "Yes, I want to keep remembering who I really am." Because that's all Buddhism truly is, a journey home, not to a temple, not to a doctrine, but to yourself, to that still, shining part of you that is always known. Life is fragile and beautiful and worth every breath. So wherever you are right now, take one deep breath. Feel it fill your chest. Let it remind you that you're alive, that you're enough. That peace isn't something to chase. It's something to notice. And in that noticing, may you find what you've been looking for all along. May you be safe. May you be gentle with yourself. May you be free. And may you always remember, you are already home.